I think I'd always wanted to be a writer in some way, right? When I
Mm.
was a little kid, I wrote short stories. Then when I was a teenager, I wanted to write music, be I really wanted to be Elvis Costello or John Lennon. Um, in America, radio play is a very strange thing, very rare thing. Whereas, say, in the UK, it's very common. And to me, one of the big issues I think, in the world, certainly the Western world, certainly in America, is loneliness.
And my name is Anna Aguilera. Today we're talking to Jack Canfora.
John Lawrence, Jack Canfora, is an award-winning American playwright, actor, musician, and teacher. After receiving his dramatic training at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts, he began his career as an actor in regional theatre, working mostly in Shakespearean roles such as Mercutio and Macbeth. He's been hailed by the Associated Press as white hot entertainment for his off-Broadway plays including Poetic License, Place Setting, and Jericho, a New York Times critic's pick. He was nominated along with Edward Albee, Elaine May, and Teresa Rebeck for the Newark Star Ledger's Best Play in 2007. Jack is the recipient of 2 Edgerton Playwriting Awards for Jericho in 2010 and The Source 2018. He won the 2016 Webby Award for Best Writing in a Web Series, and Jack is also the artistic director of New Normal Rep. Jack, welcome to the show.
Hi.
So tell us a little bit before we get into your career and everything. What was the path that led you to the industry and you becoming a playwright and an actor and a teacher?
Yeah. Well, it was funny because growing up, I acted in school plays and things like that, and I really enjoyed it. And it was really more for the sense of, well, it was twofold. It was for the sense of community and friends that I really was drawn to it, and also I really enjoyed performing. But it was something that I did into college, and I kept on thinking it would fall away at some point, but it didn't. And so I studied, and I really became enamored with Shakespearean acting, and really studied that pretty hard. And around the same time, when I was in my mid 20s, I started writing some sketch comedy with some friends and performing sketch comedy. And then I was going to become a father, and so I needed a real job, so quote unquote. And so I couldn't really go auditioning anymore. But I could keep writing, and so that then we said, well, let me see if I can try and write plays, and because I've been in enough of them that I should have some sense of the form. And I was very fortunate. The first full length one I wrote actually got produced, and from there on, I've been fairly lucky, and so it just seemed like the path I should follow. I actually was having more success with that than with acting.
Mm. How did you cultivate that writing? You said because you've done a lot of drama, but that doesn't necessarily translate into, the ability
Right.
to write a good narrative.
That's very true. It's very true. Now, I think I'd always wanted to be a writer in some way, right? When I
Mm.
was a little kid, I wrote short stories. Then when I was a teenager, I wanted to write music, really wanted to be Elvis Costello or John Lennon. Um, Both of those roles were filled, but I really always knew I was going to write in some capacity. And so, in fact, the acting thing was more of an unusual turn for me to take than writing in some ways. And so it sort of made sense. And I tried writing plays because that felt more realistic to me because I'd been in theaters. And so I thought, well, a person can write a play as opposed to writing like a screenplay. It means getting a movie made, which seemed sort of beyond. Might as well have been like, why don't you fly to Jupiter? So it seemed very grand to try and do that. And
Mm.
actually plays suit me better than screenplays in a lot of ways because plays are really sort of heavy with language, and that's sometimes problematic in a screenplay.
And how do you get into, it's not hard to get into Shakespearean roles, but get enamored by them. That's interesting, at least to me.
Yeah, I never, unlike a lot of kids in high school and stuff, I never minded Shakespeare. I liked him well enough, but he didn't do anything for me. But I saw when I was pretty young, it was my first year of college, maybe my second. I saw a movie by Kenneth Branagh. I saw his version of Henry V,
Hmm.
and it just excited me in a way that very few things have excited me artistically. And so I really said, well, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. And so I really spent the next few years really chasing that and studying for that. And I was getting some work, but in small theaters certainly. But it was mostly Shakespeare. Whenever I was getting work, it was generally Shakespeare.
And it's interesting because I like you said, Shakespeare is an interesting sort of pathway to follow and get into. But when you
Yeah.
see somebody do it well and act it well, I mean, it changes everything for you. I think Shakespeare, and when you've, like you said, Kenneth Branagh's versions, or if you've seen a great execution of the play where
Hmm.
the language starts to become normal to you if people are acting it well. I feel. Do you
I
feel?
completely agree. In fact, when I used to teach Shakespeare, right, we teach in high school, what we call in America high school, 11th and 12th grade, just like 16 and 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. I would never have them read the play. I would find a really good production and show them a scene, and then we'd go through it because there's a skill and technique to speaking Shakespeare correctly. Otherwise, it becomes gobbledygook. It's like to me, it would be a lot of teachers would just have the students, these really, really bored 15-year-olds reading out loud. And I couldn't understand anything if I relied on a bored 15-year-old to read it out loud. It's like trying to get an appreciation of Mozart and say, here, we're going to hand it to these fourth grade violinists. And we're going to really enjoy the magic of Mozart's melodies. It's not fair to it. So that's my 2 cents on Shakespeare, on teaching Shakespeare. But I completely agree because you're right. Because if it's done well, you really basically understand it. And it's sort of like it is in some ways a different language, but I would tell them, and this is true, like 70% of the language is exactly modern. But what happens is we get stuck on the bits that we don't know. And then like wait, two more lines have gone by. And so it becomes very difficult. And I think it's about, the best actors tend to like hit the line words you need to hit. And you're not going to get every word necessarily, but that's okay. You're going to get the gist of it. And the poetry is going to pop that way, I think. So I guess I'm here to say that Shakespeare was good. There's one takeaway from this podcast, that Shakespeare was a good playwright. That's a hill I'll die on.
Absolutely.
What
Mhm.
makes his stories good and his characters good?
Well, I think most of his stories, of course, were stolen. They were like, they were sort of common stories. Like there were millions of versions of Hamlet or Julius Caesar. Um, I think plotting isn't really his strength. That's not to say that he didn't do things very brilliantly with plot, but to me, the two things that stand out to me are his psychological insight and and of course his language too. You take a play like Macbeth, um, and the like his insight into the way people behave and what compromises they make that really how that can haunt them and how they are haunted, really shows to me a real wisdom and insight to human nature. I mean, Hamlet to me that's the closest thing I've encountered that explains the human condition. Like John Gielgud said, the role of Hamlet basically is basically explains what it means to be human. Because there's not a single, there's almost no emotion or conflict that Hamlet doesn't have a viewpoint on. Um, and then of course you add to the amazing language that is, poetic. I mean, they called them dramatic poets back in those days, not playwrights. And I feel like I'm getting really pedantic really fast. But yeah, but that to me is the allure of Shakespeare, is the psychological insight. Because if there are 100 Julius Caesars, or I'm exaggerating, but there are a bunch of Julius Caesar plays. But Shakespeare's Julius Caesar play gave Brutus real complexity and and ambiguity and doubt and things like that. And most characters, if you look at the older plays of that time, and why would you? Many of the other writers, there was not they were less three dimensional in many cases.
That's interesting. And so just to go back to your career and things like that, you've got a company, an online theater company called New Normal Rep, right?
Hmm.
So tell us what this is and how that came about.
Well, it came about. It is an online theater company, as you say. It came about during the pandemic, and America shut down in March, and by April, early April, I was getting a little stir crazy, and so I reached out to some friends of mine, most of whom were actors, and said, "Well, why don't we just meet once a week on Zoom and read a play? It can be any play, anyone can choose it, anyone can play any role they want." And it was a lot of people really got into that, and it was a nice little ritual. Like every Wednesday night, we'd meet and we'd have a play, we'd have parts, and it was in part, I think, to keep all of our muscles from atrophying too much, but also really it's just an excuse to sort of see each other and and hang out. My friend Eleanor Handley, who's a company member, she described it as like we built a little sort of campfire in the dark of that time. And after a while, we realized we have a really good makings of a really strong company. And so we did some fundraising. We got a little bit of money, and at that time, if you remember, there were people doing a lot of readings online, um, but they were pretty primitive because no one knew it. It was a brand new medium, and we thought, well, we can maybe make this medium worthwhile rather than just sort of clunkily reading from music stands, in the Zoom in everyone's apartment. And so we really worked and played with the sort of the aesthetics, and so we we came up with a system or an aesthetic, I guess, for lack of a less pompous word, where it would look like everyone, although we recorded in separate places, obviously during the pandemic, but it looked like we were all in the same room. And the one concession we made is that we is the actors would speak directly into the camera like you and I are doing now. Um, and what a lot of people said when they saw it, they said they felt like they were in the scene because it's a new angle from which to see it. And it's not. We don't pretend it is theater. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff about the theatrical experience that this doesn't capture, but it's a new medium, and I think it has obviously has a lot of drawbacks, but I think it has a lot of positives too. One of which is that, and this is really sort of our ethos, is that it is giving theater or a theatrical experience. We only produce plays as opposed to say like television scripts or screenplays, um, and we do that basically or almost for free. And as long as you have internet, you can get it. And I think one of the reasons why, in America anyway, theater is very much not on the radar of most people is that they don't have access to it. It's not. I mean, community theaters, but I mean, they don't have professional theaters nearby. And even if they do, it's generally very expensive. In New York, it's incredibly expensive to go see a play. So we thought this is kind of revolutionary. And well, obviously, there are elements of theater that we can't do with this. There are elements that we can capture, and one of it is the intimacy that people in theaters feel. And in fact, if anything, this can be more intimate. Um, and of course, television and film can be incredibly intimate too, and often is. But it's intimate within the context we're watching that scene, whereas the people now are in this scene. And it also it allows us to sort of privilege language and dialogue in a way that movies and TV really can't. So that's what it has in common too with the theatrical experience.
So would you think the difference between, let's say, recorded theater or online theater or the virtual experience of theater
Right.
and film and TV relies mostly on language? Or where do you feel like the difference
I think so. I mean, I
is?
think there's a few things. I mean, first of all, and I'm speaking generally here, and I don't think I'm saying anything particularly insightful, but I think, like film is basically you're telling a story through pictures. You're telling a story through pictures, and I've heard people say that describe dialogue in movies as a necessary evil. And if you look back, and it's getting more that way all the time. If you watch movies in the '70s, let alone the '50s or '40s, there's a lot more talking and a lot more static stuff, and now it's you can go 10 minutes, almost literally 10 minutes in a movie, and there'll be no talking. There'll be a lot of action, even in like a drama. So language is very much minimized. And I think it is to a lesser degree with television. But in plays, it's language, but it's also the fact that usually, certainly modern plays, because of budget constraints in theaters, there's only a few characters and they don't necessarily move around from they don't go in the car to the restaurant and then out to the bar. It becomes very difficult to do that, and so there's a different type of writing involved, and it's kind of restricting in a way, but in a way that restriction is liberating in the way that some writers or poets will like write a sonnet or a particular or a villanelle or something like that has a specific stricture and says you have to do it in this way because it's an interesting challenge.
There's also something to be said about accessibility to people who don't live in New York or live into places where, they could join a theatre company. I think, even though the pandemic is largely, behind us, hopefully, that this medium could also still be utilized to access people around the world that don't have that. And I still think there's such opportunity there.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we're still around. I mean, because I think that it would be a shame to have it go away. And of course, we're not pretending that it's good. We don't think and we don't want it to like replace theater, but it's a nice adjunct to it. And again, anyone who has internet access can basically watch our stuff. And then we have a YouTube page, which is all free. We have actually we had 4 full length plays produced in our first season, and one of them is up on our YouTube page for free. You can watch it anytime you want. There's also smaller dramatic works. And so, yeah, we're very excited about the idea of like spreading it around. And we did also a radio play, and we put it on a podcast platform, which is something that we're very excited about. And that is completely free. Go to whatever your local podcast, whatever your local, your local,
This is
or,
step 8.
farm to table podcastery. You go there and you look up New Normal Rep, and the play's name is Step 9 with the number 9. And
Oh, Step
then
9.
it's a full radio play in 8 episodes, completely for free. And so, again, we think it's great to give that sort of accessibility.
What
And
have
how's
been
that?
the lessons you? Or go
Sorry,
ahead.
go
Emma.
ahead. I was just going to say, how is the audio play on a podcast platform being received? Is it well listened to? Is it people downloading it?
People have seemed to really like it. We're trying to get the word out more. I mean, it has fair amount of people have listened to it, but in addition to just enjoying talking with you, one of the reasons I'm here is to try and get people to try and give that a listen. We're proud of the product, and we think it's a great way of doing things. I know, like, for example, in America, a radio play is a very strange thing, very rare thing. Whereas, say, in the UK, it's very common. It never went away, really. And so we're trying to sort of really take advantage of that medium as well, because while it's by no means free to produce, it's costs less money to produce than a full length streaming play. And so we can do more of those. And this play in particular, we thought was a good fit for this because there's, believe it or not, there's 8 characters in it, and 8 characters in a play, like a non-musical, is considered a lot of characters these days because theaters are working under such tight budget constraints. One of my plays, which I've been fortunate to have a nice run in publication, and but I've had theater companies come up to me and say, we'd love to do the play, but can you cut a few characters? Which of course I can't. And it's only in the play only has 6 characters. So it's not like I have a cast of thousands. So you're asking earlier, like, one of the differences between TV and film and theater. That's one of the differences. That's a big difference.
There must be something to be said for that, though, because the people are so into listening to audiobooks, so why wouldn't they listen to audio plays, right? If they
That's
knew
what I
it
keep
was
saying. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and people have started to do that a little bit more. I know Audible, which is a company in America, has started to produce some of these radio plays. Not that I want to, advertise for them and supposed to us, but yeah, there are definitely outlets in which you can find that. And like I said, in the UK, you can find a lot of productions of those sorts of things, a lot of radio plays. I just listened to one. It was a mystery comedy starring Bill Nye, and it was on BBC. So yeah, it's a fun thing. It's a fun medium. And again, I think it's just another way of getting the concept of theater or theatrical works on people's radar.
I love that. I actually really do like radio plays, and so
Great!
yeah, no, I'll definitely listen to it. But
Please.
it's interesting to think about that idea, and it is really hard to be able to transmit what you want and what you're trying to with your entire body when you only do it through the voice.
Right, right. And so a writer like myself, radio plays are kind of like a natural medium because I'm really dialogue dependent, and so a radio play even more so. You really need to explain everything, and of course there's sound effects and stuff. But I mean, so it sounds like it's taking place in a world. But yeah, language is the only thing you have to go on, really. So to me, that's exciting as a writer.
Mm. Mm-hmm. So your stuff is on YouTube and it's on a podcast.
Yep.
And so how do people find that? Just so we know while we're on that
Very
topic.
good question. If you can, first of all, you can visit our website at www.newnormalrep.org. You can also go to any podcast platform and search New Normal Rep and Step 9, because the name of the play is Step 9. And that's how you find the podcast. And go to YouTube and you type in New Normal Rep, and our page should come up, and you'll have lots of different things to choose from. We have sketches, we have like very 10-minute plays, monologues. We have Jericho, which is about a full length play. It's not about a full length play; it is a full length play.
And when you pick those plays, obviously, you know, a lot of the times plays are dependent on maybe what's happening on stage. Do you pick a text that is basically relies less on what the physical movements are, and do you describe things that happen if you can't, or is it just the dialogue of the play?
No, we make the adjustments. Like in the full streaming play, it's, I mean, there are visual things, but they're only visual things in the context that would be able to become put across in the streaming way. I have to say that our first season, for example, our plays, the main things we were looking for plays was a sense of different voices, diverse voices, and just quality work. Often we wanted them to be new or underproduced. For example, Nilo Cruz, who won a Pulitzer Prize for his play Anna in the Tropics, he had a play that he liked very much, but it wasn't being done as often as he would have liked. So he did that play, and he had, we had some very well-known actors in that one. In this one, because it sounds a little like narcissistic, because a lot of the stuff that's up online happens to be my stuff, and the only reason that is that I'm okay with the copyrights. Like I don't have to pay me. So we're going to try and get permission to get other plays up there too, because we really do have a diversity of voices. But it so happens that the radio play is mine and Jericho is mine. But there's other stuff, I swear, by other really great writers, and the majority of stuff isn't by me, because that would be incredibly narcissistic even by my standards. So.
Hey, I mean, if you don't have to pay the writer, then it's good.
Exactly. I think that's the defining characteristic of most of my career.
I'll put it on because you don't have to pay me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'll pay you. Just stay here.
That's not very motivating if I were writing.
Yeah, I know. I've often joked that, being a playwright, wanting to be a playwright in America is a little bit like growing up in the Sahara and wanting to be a downhill skier. There's not that big an audience for it. But, luckily I have been able to make some money in some of my plays. But, it's hard. And as a writer, you just want to get your stuff out there. It's not like being a novelist, right? Where when you write the novel, obviously you want people to read it. But when you've written a novel, you're done. It is a complete work, a whole thing. Whereas in a play, it's not really finished until it's produced. The play is the blueprint, but the text isn't the event. So you really want these things to be done. And since first of all, the theater is always very difficult to get stuff produced, and I've been lucky that I have gotten a fair amount of stuff produced. But since the pandemic, theater in America in particular has really just taken a body blow economically. And it's very hard to get things put out there. And one of the things New Normal Rep does too that we're very proud of is we do a lot of readings, and these readings are completely free. And these are for writers who are trying to develop new work, and many of whom wouldn't be able to have the work heard by, and read by professional actors. And as a playwright, I've never met a playwright who doesn't insist on wanting to hear their work, because it is such a game-changing proposition. Things do change from the page to the stage, so to speak. And so I know for myself, when I hear something for the first time that I've written, inevitably I find that I'm repeating myself in a lot of places. And so, and you'd think I'd be able to pick that out just reading it, but it's much clearer when you hear it being read out loud.
And now a note from our sponsor. The Theatre Out Live podcast is proud to be sponsored by ClearCom. ClearCom is the leader in voice communications since 1968 for theatre and the performing arts. When the show must go on, ClearCom is there to keep the team on cue. You can find them at clearcom.com. Go check them out. I'd love to know your thoughts on the onset of AI in the industry and writing, because it terrifies you.
It terrifies me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I first of all, I'm not an expert on that at all, but it does actually scare me. I mean, I happen to be a very big Beatles fan, and I just the other day heard a song that it's an actual Beatles song. Actually, it's a Paul McCartney solo song that he wrote about 10 years ago, and it was fine. It's a catchy little tune. But the guy did it with I don't know how, obviously, but with AI, McCartney's voice was now like it was in 1966. So he de-aged the voice, and he added a part where it's now being sung by quote unquote John Lennon. And I gotta tell you, it sounds just like him. And that's and on the one hand, as an artist, I'm like, that's weird and that's wrong. But on the other hand, I listened to it, you know what I mean? Like it was I couldn't quite turn it off. Because I was just so fascinated by it. In terms of producing original work, it seems that they're doing that already. I Right for the moment, I don't think AI is producing anything that really stands up in with really good writing. I mean, I think the most you can do is do passable hack work. But I also am terrified at the exponentiality of how the iterations spawn so quickly that in just a year or two, I think they could be doing tremendously great work. I'd like to be sort of a romantic and think that any real literature worth anything tells you something fundamental or resonates with you on a fundamental level about something about being human and feeling alone. I think it was C.S. Lewis, I think, who said, "We read to know that we're not alone." And to me, the big draw of theater, as opposed to all the other mediums, is that it's a communal experience. I mean, so are movies, right? But movies are not a dialogue; they're a monologue. It's the actors doing it, and the audience reacts. But in the theater, it's a dialectic, right? It's a feedback loop because the actors do respond to the audience. And that affects them, and so it's a sort of dialogue. And to me, one of the big issues I think in the world, certainly the Western world, and certainly in America, is loneliness, like a feeling of isolation and alienation. And I think that we should grab hold of any tools we can that will combat that. And I do think plays and theater, even if it's streaming, I think that the work inevitably is about a communal experience. So I don't think AI can really ever get to that. I mean, I hope, you know what, I hope they can, because if it can, then it suggests to me that we're far more predictable as creatures than we'd like to think. And I think there's a degree to which that is true, but there has to be a heart to it, a heartbeat to it that we will respond to and that will resonate with us. And I don't know that science can come up with that. Having said that, I don't know what I'm talking about with AI, but the idea of, but I have to believe that there's something irreducibly human in really good art that is going to be, uh, unreproducible. Um, and that, maybe I'm being too romantic about it, but I do believe that.
Well, I
What do
mean,
you guys think? What do
well,
you
I
two
think
think?
that I think an NFT is not going to replace a Picasso, right?
Right. Okay.
So,
Right.
so I think that like it's an interesting thing. I asked you because as a writer, there's a strike going on with the writers in
Mm.
Hollywood right now, and
Yeah.
I think it's exciting and terrifying at the same time. And I think for
Yep.
all of the reasons that AI should be utilized for the good, it should be used for the good, and then all the things that are kind of cannot should be for the bad should be left aside, and it's up to us to navigate that. That's my thought. And I
Yeah.
think that if AI can suddenly start to perform surgeries that are not possible before because of technology and things like that, if it can, you can
Right.
envisage a scenic design and then have them draw all of the
Right.
AI draw all of the construction drawings for you. You could
Oh,
save
I love
money,
that.
right? So I think theater has to look at it in a way of how can it provide opportunity for people
Hmm.
to create community and be more creative and have more time and money to stay together and hang out together than spending
Hmm.
money on production aspects that you and then yeah I'm not negating the fact that you might remove a construction drawings job and other jobs, but again
Hmm.
lean into the putting the money where you can have humans together. I saw something
Hmm.
on social media which I really loved. It was just like a quote that scrolled past me. It's like, we don't need AI to make art. We need AI to do everything else so we can make more art. And I like
Hmm.
that, you know. And
That
so
is good.
I feel like we just need to guide it in that direction. And so I look for it myself for things to
Yeah.
make my life more efficient. I was
Hmm.
on Chat GPT to help me do a Google Sheets formula that I couldn't figure out yesterday, and it helped me. And if
Oh,
that gives me 10, 15 more minutes with my children at the end of the day, rather than me Googling it and trying to figure it out myself, then I'll take
right.
it, right? So
Right. Yeah.
that's my thing. But the writing thing is an interesting niche because and again, I might go on it too much. There was a thing that they did a while ago. They showed the computer like 100 horror movies,
Mm.
and then they
Mhm.
showed them a trailer of all those horror movies, and then they made a new movie, and they said make a trailer for this horror movie, and it just did it because it had got its machine learning had learnt what are the key points of
Right.
a horror movie to collect together.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I think the potential to write quality, if you fed a computer all of the plays in the world and said write your own play, I'm sure it could do it. I'm sure it could do
Right.
it, but what does that mean, and how can we as humans resonate with that? I don't know. But it's something, it's a space to play in right now. Like you said, it's not advanced enough for, if you get it to write something for you, you've still got to tweak it.
Right.
So maybe it's a way
Yeah.
that writers can lean into that and say, I want to write a dialogue about this, and it generates it for you, and then you tweak it in a human sense to make it resonate. I think that's the fast track.
Yeah. Maybe. Maybe. And and I think everything. I agree with everything you say. The last part of it, though, I got to say, makes me uneasy. Even like coming out with, it's not like coming up with say a spreadsheet or something. Um, to me, it's and again, I'm not. I haven't really started. I literally started wrestling with this question about 2 weeks ago because I'm so behind the curve of modern culture. But yeah, I mean, like to me, that is something that anything that purports to really explain the human experience, art or philosophy or something like that. I'm very uncomfortable with AI getting involved in because it seems predicated on a type of consciousness and
Hmm.
awareness of, and so eventually it will they'll have to have AI develop consciousness, which of course is the thing everyone's terrified of because soon we'll be all serving our computer overlords. But I mean, the thing you brought up earlier about Picasso is I don't think a computer back of course they didn't have them back then, but let's say as a thought experiment, I don't think a computer could have taken what had come before and then come up with Picasso.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like that leap, that imaginative leap, um, isn't something that it can do. And if it ever does develop to that point, then I think we're in a lot of trouble. We have bigger problems to worry about than art, because then there's ethical implications too of, well, if a program or AI is in fact develops a consciousness, if it is then a conscious being, does it have rights? Does it have? I mean, is it right for us to use it as in a sort of enslavement?
Mm.
Which
Oh,
again, yeah,
that is
yeah.
big.
So I want, happy thought, but I mean, that's something to. I think that's an ethical consideration people are going to have to wrestle with. If it gets that good, if in order to get this good, AI needs to develop something akin to what we would call consciousness.
Mm.
Um, I think that we're a long ways away from that. I mean, I'm not basing it on anything other than scientists and philosophers have for decades tried to struggle with what I think is called the hard problem, which is like, what is consciousness, and how does, and like, what's the leap to consciousness, and how does one arrive at that physiologically and evolutionarily speaking? So I'm a
And
little
where is it
skeptical
as
that
well,
AI is going
right?
to find it. I'm sorry.
And where is consciousness as well? Because there's a lot of
Where does
debate
it
that it's not
reside?
even it's not even here. It can be everywhere, right? So that's
Exactly,
that's a
and that's what yeah.
fascinating topic.
Yeah. So it is fascinating. And, I guess if you want to be an optimist about it, it can help us solve those sorts of problems by seeing how it develops. But like anything else, I think it's a tool, and it can be sort of used for good or bad. I think the worst case scenario worries for me is that, someone is going to go too far with it. It's just, whether or not I'm okay with it or comfortable with AI in making art is couldn't be less relevant because some people are going to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's there whether we like it or not, right? But I think that's why I think like the artists and the philosophers and the psychologists, everybody needs to be involved in this. Like it can't just let the tech go and run, right? Like I think that it's not going away whether we like it or not. So it's good that you're starting to think about it, because I think that people with opinions and who create art need to be involved in this evolution. Otherwise it might go in a direction that's not productive.
Well, if you've noticed during this brief discussion, I've become more and more fetal in my positioning.
It really is an overwhelming topic, because it's so, like you said, the speed at which it moves is just incredible. And every day I'm seeing stuff that's like online that's like this and this and this and this. Is like I literally can't keep up with how fast this is moving.
Yeah, I can't program my video, my DVR. I mean, I get into fights with all sorts of technology. My blender. I'm not good with it, and so now to think that there's something that can like control me better than I can control it. I mean, I'd like to keep that in the domain of my romantic relationships. I'd like it not to be.
I love it. Oh, goodness.
I love it, Anna, that you said that they should take us into consideration. Since when? Since when are artists? Well, I guess at some point they were, but they would long not being considered for anything in the world.
That's so true, Anna. That's so true. But I think too of something. I think Walt Whitman said. Whitman, I think he was one of the first people to really vocalize this. And by the way, a fellow Long Islander like I am, he argued that literature and art was actually more important than government, which I think is an overstatement, to be sure. But his point was that what do we remember from most cultures? Inevitably, it's the art. Inevitably, it's the literature that stays with us more. And so I think in the long term, like I think we are represented to future generations more by art than are by the momentary political squabbles that dominate our everyday lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the same time, I think that's how we process what we're going through politically and socially. And this is something where I don't know how much AI, because right now, today, AI is just an average of what's out there already. There's not really a creative input. There's like a shuffling average. This is what you get, right? So I don't know how it's going to be later on. I think it's like, as Anna was saying, every day is faster, and because it's an exponential thing and it learns on itself. So I don't know what's going to be and how we're going to keep up with that. But at the end of the day, what we do as artists is to reflect and to process our day-to-days, and that's how we contribute to society, so they can also sit down and reflect with us and understand or run away, whatever the choice of the day is.
Right.
But I don't know that's something that AI can do just now, today.
Right.
Although tomorrow.
And to be devil's advocate about it, though, like when we dream, for example, we have these very creative dreams, that sometimes are fascinating, and although when we wake up, they're often bizarre and don't hold to cohere. But when you dream something, there's nothing that you can dream that doesn't exist already in your mind in some form or fashion, and it just throws all these different patterns together. So you could argue that very little art ever comes about out of whole cloth. It's always influenced in like a different confluence of things that have happened in the past, which is what scares the heck out of me about AI, to be sure. But I do agree with you that I think, like I was saying earlier, that I think you could probably write, hack work. Like, in other words, like you could plug in and say, okay, we need a mediocre sitcom, about someone, has to, here's a typical plot point, deliver it. And my guess is it probably could. But the stuff that's going to sort of take your breath away, and the stuff that's going to make you move you, and the stuff that's going to make you understand yourself and feel more, make you think and feel more alive or connected or more joyful, or you name it. I like to think that is, I'm just hubristic enough to think that that's something that only humans could do.
Yeah, and I think also just for the mere fact that a theatrical production is a combination of a number of people coming together with their
Right.
different skill sets through a human experience. And that is really difficult to replace. For example, you're in tech and you got a lighting designer and a programmer and a director and the actors on stage, and you've got all of these things that, like, that tangibly cannot be. And magic happens in those moments when you figure out that the light
Yes.
going on that place and the actor saying this at this moment with the director saying turn that way so you look, those that's such a human aspect of
Yes.
that theatrical experience that then people watch. AI cannot replicate that lighting designer and the director and the actor and the perceived person who's perceiving that. So
Yeah.
in that
I
sense,
agree. I mean,
even
certainly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No. You go. You're on a
No, so
roll.
I'm just saying that's that when I think about if anything, it probably in the long term, yes, maybe all of that film and screen stuff can be all AI done, but the live theatrical thing might be our final frontier that it can't penetrate when you think
It
about
might
it.
be, right? I mean, well, maybe AI isn't so bad after all. No, I mean, maybe it would be ironic if we go back to basically where the Greeks were, and you're right, because there's something, I mean, just the pragmatics of it. I mean, you're not going to get animatronic actors, it's, at least I hope not yet. And there's something sort of really wonderfully human about being a part of an audience or being on stage in a play, because it is, like I said, it's a dialogue. I mean, the lines are the same, the movements are the same usually every night, but every night is a different performance, and that's because there's literally probably tens of millions of variables that go into the equation. Every single member of the audience is a variable, and what the actors ate last night, and like who didn't get a good night's sleep, and who's fighting with their spouse, and all these things combined, sometimes all at once, and so they all combine and to create something that's sort of unrepeatable. It's the unrepeatability of theater, I think, that
That's right.
is great, and also frustrating at times for actors and everyone else involved too. But to me, it's that sort of it's close to its essence, is that unrepeatability.
Mm, mm.
Which is, I guess, what AI is not, and with what
Yes.
AI is not aiming to do. Because
Yeah.
technology
No.
is
Yes.
all
Even
about
trying to do.
repetibility. Whatever.
Repeatability, yeah.
Repeating things over and over.
Yeah. Well, I just made up
But
unrepeatability. I'm pretty sure that's not an actual word in any language. But,
I like it.
I think
yeah.
I think we do have it in Spanish, but irrelevant. Yeah, but that's a good point. That it goes against like what we're trying to do and what we do on a day or a night to night basis on a stage is different to what technology is trying to achieve, which is optimize a process and be able to replicate the process every time.
That's so true. Because I mean, having a different experience every night in a theater and in a play is incredibly inefficient. And I would think technology privileges efficiency, and its inefficiency is part of its magic. It's part of its fun. And yeah, I think that most of the things that theater brings, I don't think AI can replicate, and I'm hoping that applies to the scripts too, because then I'm out of a job. But yeah, I think that I think it is, I was talking about streaming theater as sort of being like the Wild West and the new frontier, and it is. But man, talking about the ultimate new frontier. I'm very curious to listen to this podcast, like say 10 years from now when it's in the, they put it in the Smithsonian. Because I think that's what you do. You pick up physical podcasts and you put them in the museum. If I understand podcasting right, and I'm pretty sure I do, to see how much of it has come to fruition, and how hopefully we've tamed it, I guess is a word to use, maybe, or maybe, see, taming implies consciousness, that we've channeled it, I think, into more productive means.
Well, I'm saying it right here now that we've decided collectively on what date is it? The 10th of May in 2023. Theatre is not dead yet.
No, not dead yet. Yeah.
And there's a future for it. I'm an optimist, and so's Anna. So this is good. So Jack,
Excellent.
we always finish our podcast with the two same questions. So we're going to ask these two questions of you now.
Okay.
What's your most favorite thing about your job or the industry?
Industry. I don't have many favorite things about the industry, but I have a lot of favorite things about my job. And it's actually a surprisingly easy question for me to answer. It's being in the room with actors and designers and directors whom I trust and like and admire, and we're working things out. We're figuring out how to tell the story, and to be in a room collaborating with people is, and it's I get weak in the knees thinking about that.
Amazing.
It's funny. It's a very similar answer to one we got maybe 2-3 weeks ago.
Oh well, maybe it's the right answer. Maybe I won. No,
Yeah.
But being a playwright, I'll say this about being a playwright. For me, it's a perfect mix of things because I do like my alone time, right? And so writers need to be alone. So I have time alone, but then I can bring it and then we collaborate. I mean, and so I like being part of that community too. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a director, but yeah, usually people tend to say people just in general, and you guys were very specific on which moment with the people doing what, and it's and it's that creative moment and spark with.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and to share. It's about there are so few opportunities I think these days to really feel truly connected to other people, and that's one of the moments you can do it.
Mm.
So on the flip side, what would you change if you could change anything, either about your job or the industry?
Well, I mean, apart from my lack of Tony Awards and and Pulitzer prizes, I think in all seriousness I would actually want theater to be more accessible, not just geographically, but certainly in terms of price. And I would like in America there to be an organization or the infrastructure for a sort of national theater, which of course America doesn't have. Say like in Britain, there's obviously the National Theatre, and is there one in Australia? I'm assuming there was in Australia too. That there's big government funding in most countries, I think, for the arts.
Mm-hmm.
In America, that is not the case. So I can say that as an American, I would love that because that would not only bring out really great writers and artists and actors and sort of to spread them around the country, So I mean, we had that in America during during the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt during the Depression. I would love it if a government funded professional theaters were in like every state, and it would give people a chance to not only work as an actor, to earn a living as an actor or playwright or play director, which is virtually impossible to do. And it would also expose people to stuff that I think is really worthwhile.
Oh, that's a wonderful want and wish for America. I really love that. Jack, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. We got very philosophical in this podcast, and we love when we get that. We love that. From AI to Shakespeare, it's been a perfect conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. And this was a real pleasure, and had a great time talking with both of you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for
and
joining
just as a quick recap, where can people see your plays on YouTube and listen to your podcasts?
Well, they can and indeed should go to any podcast platform and just type in New Normal Rep and step 9, the number 9, and that will take them to their to the radio play. They can go to YouTube and type in New Normal Rep, and we have our own page. You can also go to our website to give you a full menu of things we have out there at www.newnormalrep.org. And if if you want to read any of my plays, I have a couple plays out on Amazon that everyone should probably buy 10 copies of, just in case they want to play it in their living rooms on the Saturday night.
Amazing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you so much.